Hi. So this is not a particularly Python-specific talk. This has more to do with the web and character sets and browsers and databases, because some people actually find that useful. So switching character sets with the engine running on the web, how to go from CP1252. So character sets, very quickly, character sets map bytes and characters together. To use Unicode terminology, every character is conceptually a code point, and you can represent that code point in various ways as strings of bits. So you have Latin 1, aka ISO 8859-1. There's ASCII that we all know and love. Everyone's heard about UTF-8. And the old web default is, Latin 1, 8859-1. Yeah, except that Latin 1 is pronounced CP1252. The HTML5 spec actually says thou shalt interpret Latin 1 as CP1252. And ISO 8859-1 as CP1252. That's what Latin 1 looks like. That's what CP1252 looks like. So there's a bunch of common stuff in the middle, but especially in this range right here, you'll notice there's a very big difference. And that's where all your smart quotes and bullets and other funny things like Euro symbols come in, especially from people who paste onto the web from Word documents. But the web is all Unicode, right? But that would be easy. We do all love our Unicode code points. We like pasting them into web browsers and into Twitter and everything. But the problem is if you have a website that is served as Latin 1 and you type a snowman, what your web server will actually get is the ASCII bytes, ampersand, number sign, 9731, semicolon. And heaven forbid your database fields cut the end of that off, and who knows what the browser is going to interpret then. So how do you tell the difference? Well, you don't. So that was kind of mistake number one, but maybe you didn't realize that 10 years ago when you didn't have a framework. But how can we fix it now that we know that we should really be using UTF-8? So yeah, don't use Latin 1. You can't round trip that stuff. And if you had noticed, hey, when I do this, I end up getting back this ampersand number sign stuff. My users don't want that. They want what they typed. You probably didn't use a standard web escaper, and instead we're replacing angle brackets and quotation marks with entities and letting everything else through. So that it almost looked okay, but really not. So how are we going to fix this? Well, step one, if you were lucky enough to be using MySQL in this case, and your tables were in charset Latin 1, well, guess what? MySQL also pronounces it as CP1252. So that's actually really easy. You just say alter table. I would like this to be UTF-8 now, please, and it will do the correct transform for you. Yay, that's really nice. If you've got it, I'd recommend UTF-8 MB4 because it actually represents all of the current Unicode. UTF-8 is basically Unicode 2, I think. It's really old and silly. And your snowman will work, but your dominoes will not. And if you continue to connect only to the database using Latin 1 at this point, you can continue to tell the internet that you're Latin 1, and they'll continue to send all the old data, but at least you can transform your database one step at a time and make sure that that still works and that everything's happy. So that's nice. You can do that online, assuming you don't have tables that are too big. Step two is going through the entire app and upgrading everything that thinks it's speaking Latin 1 to thinking that it's speaking UTF-8, and changing the database connection to being UTF-8. And I had to do this for a PHP app. Everything is a byte string there with implicit encoding of, well, whatever you think it is, or not, because it could be binary data. It's just a byte string. And so we had CP1252 with entities, and I had to go through and find all the places we were doing substring calls and make those UTF-8 aware substring calls, which took a while, but honestly wasn't the worst thing I've done. And meant that in the end, we could just deploy one chunk of code and boom, everything works nicely. Step three is at this point, you've still got a bunch of old crappy data and you're still doing bad translations on user data. Even though new snowmen are coming in cleanly, the old snowmen are still in the database. So basically you have to trawl the database, looking for HTML entities and converting them. Except there are a lot of caveats because you basically have to implement how the browser does it. So you have to accept the fact that people will have typed entities manually, and I think some of them actually came in by weird browsers. You have to handle the hex versions of entities. You have to handle the decimal versions of entities. You will end up with some people who have entities that represent things beyond the basic multilingual plane. So even if you decided, no, I'm only going to use MySQL's UTF-8 charset, you might still have entities that think they want to go beyond. You have to handle that in your translation. Surrogate pairs, which is the old way of getting things beyond the basic multilingual plane, if all you have is the multilingual plane, things like UTF-16, those will exist. You'll have to deal with them. And the real stinker is that you'd think that the numeric entities actually represent Unicode code points, because that's what they do, except in that range of 80 to 9F, where they actually represent CP1252. So that's a euro, not a C1 control code. Step 4 then is fix your escaper so that you're actually serving text plain, and any meta characters that might be in your text are escaped properly in an HTML context or JavaScript context. Do be careful about that. Don't use an HTML escaper in a JavaScript context, because if someone puts an end script tag inside a string in a chunk of JavaScript that you have injected into your page, guess what? Your script tag's over. And now it's game over, and they have owned your page. So enjoy the UTF-8. If you have not read Joel Spolsky on Unicode, it's a really good, old, but really good read. Ned Batchelder also did a nice talk last year on the pain of Unicode and how to use it. There you go.